said that autonomous systems don't create outcomes, incentives do. What do you mean by that, and why is that distinction so important?
Why autonomous systems don't create outcome and incentive do, right? You know, it's like Charlie Munger, go back to Charlie Munger, show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome. Literally, that's a classic. I mean, I'll give you an example. I mean, if you're building any system of a sort, right, whether it is autonomous, semi-autonomous, or fully human, right, that system alone, right, does not generate outcome. Let's use a company as an example. If you're building any company of a sort, let's assume you're a lawyer, you're building a law firm, and then you put a bunch of lawyers. That alone, having a company, having lawyers, having clerks, having paralegals, it doesn't necessarily create the outcome that you want. So you need to create incentives in place for the whole system to be fully optimized toward individual incentives and overall incentive. And the same applies for systems that are semi-autonomous or fully autonomous. Otherwise, you'll be optimizing for the wrong outcome. I give you an example. I mean, Amazon was a case in point. Amazon in the beginning, they were optimizing for speed. You know, they felt like we can replace all workers within these warehouses, and we're going to optimize for speed, and because the robot can operate 24/7, doesn't need sick days, doesn't complain, doesn't need coaching, doesn't need motivation, etc., etc. But the problem with that's the wrong metrics to optimize for, because, you know, you can optimize for speed, but what if the items that you are putting in a box are the wrong item to be delivered to your customers? Number one. What about if you're optimizing for speed, but then you're not optimizing for safety? Now you have lawsuits upon you because people getting unnecessarily injured within your warehouse. Same goes with healthcare, right? Healthcare is, right now we all heard about the surgical robot, the Da Vinci one, right? So they can stitch you within a controlled environment, right? And so if you minimize all the exogenous events, so, you know, the robot needs to just do few things within a controlled environment, you can operate. So you can optimize for accuracy and safety. But if you get past, so the environment is highly controlled. But if you get past that, then it becomes a little bit dangerous. And you have an uncontrolled environment where you have to account for many variables. And that's why we are a big fan of start with a controlled environment and then optimize for a specific outcome. Once you optimize for the specific outcome, you can iterate. And hence, an autonomous system on itself cannot optimize an outcome. You have to define the outcome within the environment in which you're operating to be able to achieve the result. And by the way, the result, usually people opt in for the result that are naked eye, they're easily measurable. Usually these are the wrong results. As I mentioned earlier, it's not the speed of delivery. It's usually a combination of speed, accuracy, and safety.
Why do incentives matter more than intelligence once systems become autonomous? And then what incentives are misaligned in autonomous systems? And how does that misalignment compound over time?
Look, the most expensive thing that you can build in an autonomous economy is a system that is technically excellent and incentively wrong. So in robotics, in tech in general, you know, people love, because it's very tech heavy and geeky, and so people like to think, especially engineers and conceptualists, about instant gratification. Unfortunately, this has been proven even in business. The most technical systems or the most technical product are not going to cut it sometimes, right? If the incentives are wrong. I'll give you a case that we all know. For those of us who are old enough, I don't know if you remember, there's a plane that used to, you know, fly between London, actually even Paris and New York, called Concorde. It was a marvel of technology. I think it used to fly between London and New York in less than 3 hours. And but it deemed not safe, quite frankly. And I think it crashed, and, you know, it got put into, you know, bad. And now we just resume traveling on, you know, regular speed. And so that's an example of you optimizing for speed, but you're neglecting safety. The problem with a system that is fully autonomous, right? Whereas a human intervention is de minimis, right? I mean, if the incentive is wrong, but the system is technically superior and is fully autonomous, then if you're optimizing for the wrong outcome, there's nothing to fall back on, so, right? The system can go rogue. And since the system goes up, it grows exponentially, and then, you know, what goes up goes down also. So if it's exponentially superior, it could also be at the detriment of, you know, mistakes too. So also, if people only think about compounding positive numbers, they don't think about compounding negative numbers. So a 10%, a 10, that's grown at 20%, roughly probably doubles in 5 to 7 years. But it also, if it decreases by 20%, you lose 80% of your value in also 5 years. So that's how I want to think about it. So design the incentives first. Make sure that you're optimizing for the incentives, and then try to fit in a system that optimizes for that. Whether it is, if it happens to be the most technically superior system, wonderful, be it. If not, don't forget to optimize. Don't forget your level of optimization. So you're not optimizing for the most technically proficient system. It's the incentive that drives that. A system that is technically working, but it was optimized for the wrong outcome. Well, I can name a few. Some of them are kind of pedestrian, for those of us who've been around, not necessarily robotics, but think of Wall Street investment banks, for instance, right? And this really beats me, right? I mean, 50% of the income of the banks, so the revenue, 50% of it, literally, it's not even, goes to employees, and doesn't go to all employees equally, right? So that some will make $20, $30 million a year, some will make not. Anyway, the question is that's the wrong incentive. If you're shareholders backing these companies, that's why these companies thrive under partnership, but they're not necessarily suitable to be a great vehicle for equity holders. They need equity to grow, don't get me wrong, but if you want to put your money, put it somewhere else. I mean, we're talking about a misalignment of interest. So the employees will get paid first ahead of the shareholders, and then whatever is left goes to shareholders. And by the way, employees leverage the balance sheet of the company. So if the company goes bust, some of them still get paid, believe it or not. We've seen that in 2008, right? But then the equity gets wiped out. That is a system that is not tenable. And in 2008, have we not intervened as a government, as a Federal Reserve, to rescue the banks? Well, all the banks would have gone to zero. But unfortunately, that's not how the world works. The shareholder gets wiped out, some of the employees get laid off, but those who were responsible for designing that incentive stayed in place. So that's, an example of the system that is, technically superior. I mean, people are pretty smart, but the incentive is misaligned. Same thing goes with robots, by the way. Same thing goes with any system.
How should leaders think about designing incentives for systems that are operating continuously and at scale?
How can we think about a system that is properly designed, so it's properly optimized for the right metrics, but also can endure the test of time? So I think once I heard Jeff Bezos said something, you have to be very focused on your vision and flexible on your execution. So you want to design a system that is really focused on a vision. What are you trying to eventually get there? Because you may not actually get there at the first attempt. But how do you imagine your overall economy or system be, the next 5-10 years? And then that's a one design of a sort. But then, you got to account for flexibility, malleability, and self-correcting mechanism. I mean, that is the only way for anybody designing a system to kind of iterate, because failures are very costly. So you have to think about, if I'm designing a system, don't think about the upside. The upside takes care of itself. Think about, if I'm wrong in this step, how much it's going to cost me, and you can actually optimize to minimize that. So you have to account for your costly mistake will have to cost you 10 times less than your win. So usually think about it as investing, right? I hate to say that because people are not rational. People usually only look at the upside, they just don't want to look at the downside, but it's a fine balance. So the upside have to outweigh the downside, but not 2-1. Usually it's 5-1. And it's not about how much money you're making in general. It's really how much you tend to lose when you're wrong. And that's how you're designing any system. If something goes wrong in here, how much you expect to lose? If you want to integrate a robot or fleet of robots within your system, if something goes wrong, right? What are the repercussions? The repercussion could be catastrophic. Sometimes if it's public, if it's safety related, right? That can halt your whole operation.